Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels, and I'm here to give you exactly what the internet needed. Yet another Stormlight Archive video. In this case, I'm going to talk about, share my thoughts on Rhythm of War, which seems to be, by popular opinion, the least liked of the four Stormlight Archive books, at this point of recording at least, but after rereading it, as part of prep for Stormlight 5, I think that this may have been the most impactful book in the series to date, and I'll get into that in a bit. But what's going on in Rhythm of War? Essentially, it's been a year since the events of Oathbringer, and the war has essentially stagnated. It's just become a game of tit for tat with no real major change in the status quo. So it's now a situation where both sides are racing for a way, some edge, some way to break the deadlock, and to not just end this conflict, but to potentially end the desolations as a whole. Period. The entire conflict, the entire basis for that conflict, and as things progress in that vein, and it becomes more and more glaring the challenges that each side faces. The question becomes: can humanity even win this, or is their best bet just to simply survive? Some fraction of them to survive, and that's kind of the where we get in, kind of what we delve into with Rhythm of War, among other things. But like I said, this may have been the most impactful book of the series. It is a very fascinating read, in that like this book made me feel like Sanderson spent 3 books laying out the foundation for this world, laying out the mechanics, how everything works, slowly unfolding everything, setting all the players into different parts of the stage, so we have an idea of how this general conflict is going to unfold, what it's going to look like, and as is his wont, he starts to break all those rules and shows that he plays with our perception that just because we think this thing is an ironclad rule, it doesn't necessarily mean it is. Like, things can change, things can warp, things can be bent, things can be twisted into ways that don't necessarily, that at first glance they shouldn't be able to twist, but which make logical sense when he does it. That's kind of what he does with us for the majority of the book. In addition to that, he just unfolds so much more, so many more new and fascinating things about this series in this book. Like, we start to get a little more larger cosmic tie-ins, specifically with one of the magics in this series. Like, we see how some of the elements of it tie all the way back to what we saw in Mistborn, with how some of the metals behave there. There are some common threads that run throughout both, and they do lead to some interesting changes over the course of this series as a result, over the course of this book. So, like, just a lot of interesting detail and a lot of critical points that unfold to essentially set the stage for the 5th book, which wraps up the first arc. But that's just pretty much all plot and background development, and so, like, this book would be nothing without the characters. And as is typical for a Stormlight book at this point, like, the characters, they each undergo pretty much a complete arc throughout this book. Like, where we find them at the end of the book is nowhere near where we found them at the start of the book. And I think the most drastic of those, I can't say the most drastic, one of the more drastic of those changes would be Kaladin. Like, throughout this entire series so far, we've just seen him as this battle-tested warrior. He's the archetypical warrior trope, whatever. This book, we see him break. We see him hit a point where he simply can't function in that role anymore, and he has to choose how to go on, how to carry on, how to contribute to the war in his own way. And it delves into, in it, Sanderson takes us on a journey of what it means to be a veteran when you can't contribute to a war in the way that you were necessarily trained to, and he chooses to do this by delving into some interesting topics through, like, reskilling, like dealing with mental health, and finding a way that you can contribute to the good of society, or these kind of things. Like, that's kind of the path that he takes Kaladin ultimately throughout this book. That's not to say that Kaladin doesn't get involved in quite a bit of action. Like, there is still a bit here and there, but his approach, the mental state from which he approaches these battles is very different from any of the other three books, and that's very that makes all the difference, essentially. Then we have Shalyn, who her the whole situation with her personalities begins to change and twist and become something stranger, something darker. Like, once again, we thought we understood how she works, but in this we see that's not necessarily the case, and her story is set up here in such a way that by the fifth book, I think we're going to see her end up in a very, very interesting place. And then we have Dalinar, who once again is forced to confront the fact that he's not the man he needs to be to achieve achieve the task that he has in front of him. He has to change. He has to become something more, something greater. As he said, the most difficult step a man can take is the next step, and that's what he struggles with in his book, taking the next step, figuring out how to do so, how to contribute to the war in a way that only he can contribute to it. And so his story, like, he took a step back in a way, but at the same time he did start on the path to a very interesting direction, given the powers that he holds. And then there's the whole situation on a more minor scale with Adelaide and what his particular subplot throughout this book means. Like, there's some very interesting revelations driven by his place in this story, but most of all, like, his particular story, it has intense ramifications for, once again, what we thought we understood about this world. And then there's Navani, like, who this book is. I would have to say this book is Navani's book. Just for the amount of time we spend with her and in unfolding the mysteries behind some of the science and the physics of this world, essentially. And of course, there's how her story plays out, which initially it seemed like, oh, that's the obvious logical ending, but then we got like an ironclad no, and then things twist and turn as they always do, and somehow we end up there anyway. So there's that, and then there's the end of this book, which is, I would have to say, of all the endings in this series, this is bar none the most jaw-dropping ending in this series today. Probably one of Sanderson's most jaw-dropping endings, because I don't think anyone was ready for what happened here. Not just with one particular character, but also with the way another one who the individual who appears in all the Cosmere books, just the way that a situation unfolds with him at the end. Like, we've never seen him on that much of in that type of situation before, in a way that wasn't comical, in a way that wasn't amusing. Like, we technically saw him in similar situations in two of the secret projects, in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter and in Tress, where he was very much not his usual self. But those stories, they were low stakes, they were low regards, and they had a more comical, more whimsical element to them. Like, they weren't on this type of scale with what we witnessed with him here, and it sets a very ominous tone for how things are going to unfold in the following book, because it now means that as another individual has access to quite a bit more knowledge than he reasonably should, given what happened here. And speaking of individuals who now have access to quite a bit more knowledge than they should, we have the situation that unfolds over the course of this book between Jasna and Wit, who apparently are a thing. And it's clear that Wit is sharing some of his larger Cosmere knowledge with Jasna. And this being Jasna, it'll be very, very interesting to see how she puts that knowledge to use. But overall, like I said, for me, this book, it almost felt like a very different beast from every single Stormlight Archive book so far. Like, it's very clearly Sanderson setting the stage to just blow our minds with the fifth book. But he also takes the time to delve into some topics that, it's in keeping with what's been going on with the series, where each book it focuses on different things. It incorporates them in critical yet not overt ways. Like in this book, he deals with the struggle of aging. He deals with the limits of godhood when free will enters the chat. He deals with mental health struggles. He deals with the he deals with the reassimilation of veterans following a war and these kind of things. Like, he incorporates quite a bit into this book. It's all baked in there as just as part of the story, just as the direction that these characters' lives take. And yeah, like a lot of people say, that the meat of these books is just like they think of the page count, but for me, also a lot of the meat that's in this book, in these books, it's just the content that he delves into. And I don't mean like the overt stuff like the world building and the magic and all the lore and all that. Like just some of the topics that he decides to just kind of delve in and play out on the page and have us form our own opinions on. It makes them it makes for some very interesting reading, I should say. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Rhythm of War. Like I said, yet another video that the internet needed, yet another Starlight Archive video. If by some miracle you actually watch this and make it this far into the video, thank you very much for having quite a bit of patience, and I'll see you next time.